Mark Cockerham joined the Jersey Customs and Immigration Service as an officer in April of 1986. 38 years later, his career has encompassed work in a number of areas, including borders, intelligence, investigations, goods control and immigration. Now, as he prepares to retire, he spoke to Express about how the service has changed over the years and what challenges remain.
Drugs are the thing that tends to make the headlines, but there's quite a few threats. I've sort of got to bear in mind is that the service is very compressed in its role. The range of activities is really wide. You've got revenue collection, you've got immigration, you've got drugs. The kind of departments in the UK that would form many departments, but it's in an island environment it makes sense to have it compressed into a much smaller. It's much more cost effective and sort of operationally effective. So yes, there's a continual threat from drugs. There's also the threat of illegal immigration. The revenue is important. It's quite a chunk of the island's revenue. We collect about 85 million a year.
Wow.
So obviously, for that to be a sort of robust compliance regime, it's important that there's not a lot of leakage. Stuff isn't coming in where duties need to be charged and they're not. So I think, from the officer's perspective, when they go down to a tender boat, they don't quite know necessarily exactly what they may be faced with. It could be drugs consignment. It could literally be somebody that's come on the boat, and trying to get here illegally, sort of thing. And of course, there's the whole coastline as well. So there's quite a variety.
Quite a tricky thing to do. You have to be, jack of all trades almost.
Definitely, yeah. And I think people in customs and immigration tend to stay for quite some time. It's a career, if you like, and I think it's that variety that makes it a career, because it takes a long time to go through all those disciplines. If you start, for example, as a border officer, you may then go to specialise in something like financial crime or intelligence or investigation or immigration casework, and to move around those disciplines obviously takes some. It's taken me 38 years.
Right, yeah.
I've only just got there, and now it's time to leave. I think that gives it the challenge, and I think it's better for the public as well, because if you do get somebody coming in, for example, on a Friday night, and they're asking, I want to bring a car in from Europe, the officer will also have that experience of dealing with revenue collection as well, not just looking for the drugs consignment. So they'll be able to give an answer and say, as opposed to saying, well, you need to go to the office on Monday morning and ask, they can say, no, this is what you need to do. So I think that's better for the public as well,
I know you've led a number of operations that did have very big commercial seizures. I think listeners would be quite interested to know, as much as you can share, how you go about catching these people, because in court cases we'll often hear reference to a vehicle being stopped and then searched, but can you sort of give the tricks of the game away to a certain extent?
Not completely, no. But obviously intelligence is absolutely key. People aren't necessarily just stopped at random, and that intelligence can emanate locally. We've got a joint unit with the police. It can come from other agencies, sometimes international European agencies, and that will give us an indication of the kind of things that we need to be looking at. But at the end of the day, the sort of the experience, if you like, of the officer on the day can play quite a part. Something doesn't always appear just quite right, and so the officer that's there on the day can make a judgment. It's not always a case of finding a consignment straight away. That's pretty rare. It's often a combination of things. Something doesn't seem quite right, the story of an individual, quite often the nerves of a person, but you've got to balance that, because quite often people are just nervous anyway. Travelling can be stressful.
Especially when they're now speaking to a customs officer.
Yeah, and I always say to the officers, don't come across sometimes like American immigration do. It's quite vicious, or we're an island, but of course they've got a job to do. So there can be giveaways that sort of, when pieced together, sort of let the officer get a bit of a feeling that something's not quite right here. So a search might need to be progressed.
I'd be interested to know if you have any anecdotes, maybe bad excuses that have been given over the years with drug seizures where, they have been found but the person tried to say, I don't know, on holiday or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, some are more prepared than others. Certainly we've had instances of people coming over to say they're doing certain elements of work, and it's quite obvious from further questioning that they haven't got any experience at all in that area. Probably the most classic of all was the person that came over with a surfboard from France, and they'd been asked where they'd been, and they said they'd been surfing in Rennes, which was quite amusing. And the surfboard was eventually cut open, and lo and behold, there was a large commercial consignment in the surfboard. So, having said that, some of the stories are quite sophisticated, and some of the concealments are quite sophisticated. And don't be naive to think that we get everything coming through. Obviously, we don't. If you had a border that had such a regime that it really did try and find everything, you'd be holding up the public, you'd be holding up the supply chain.
Choking importation.
Absolutely. So it's a fine balance, and some of the criminals are ahead of us. It'd be naive not to think otherwise. So. We look at factors like the street price, we look at the availability within the island, intelligence, to sort of give us a bit of a barometer, if you like, of how successful we are at the borders.
And going back to the surfboard, I wonder if that doubled up as the most interesting concealment location. I think there's a picture of you somewhere holding a tyre where it's got a drugs package stuffed inside of it.
Yeah, I mean, I looked a lot younger in those days. Some of the officers joke that was the only consignment that I ever found. But
is the tyre maybe a bit outdated now? Do you think?
No. Tyre concealments, can still be popular. They can even be in the running wheels of vehicles. They don't have to be the spare in the back. Obviously we use things like the drugs detector dog. Yeah. Sometimes you look at the vehicle just to see, if the balance, the weighting is right. X-ray equipment, so there's various methods we can use to try and.
Do you ever recall one where you thought actually that was quite ingenious that they did that?
There's been some good concealments. I mean, professional built-in concealments into the vehicle, so not just utilising the space that's there, but if you like, actually constructing a concealment that could be used multiple times, as it were.
Well, we mentioned things coming into the island. Obviously, your replacement, Rhiannon Small, currently head of, is it Goods Control, I believe?
That's correct, yeah, Goods Control.
Strongly placed there to take over, and if you have any sort of advice, parting tips for her?
Yeah, definitely strongly placed, and I'm really pleased that through succession planning, the appointment's gone to somebody within the service. I mean, it's always healthy to have an external appointment, but I think in the case of Customs and Immigration, because it is so bespoke on the island, it's quite unique. Having that operational experience is pretty key.
And again, she's, I think, 2006, so again, already a good career behind her to take over. That's
right, yeah. I mean, in terms of advice, I think Rhiannon's the kind of person that would do this naturally, but I think, engaging with the front line, on a regular basis is really important. It sounds an obvious thing to say, but I think it's quite often overlooked, in some areas that's really where you get a good barometer of where an organisation is. You sort of, you pick up things and can make pretty quick improvements where you get that feedback from the front line that actually this isn't working, So I think spending time and not being too distant is really important, and I've got every confidence that that's something Rhiannon will continue to do.
And looking at your career, like I say, 4 decades pretty much, spanning the changes that we've seen. Interesting to know how JCIS has evolved, in your opinion. That's all changed.
Yeah, I mean, things have changed enormously. I mean, I can still sort of remember the first mobile phone the department had, the size of a brick. Had about 2 hours battery life. We used to take it out on the coast. I can even remember the first demonstration of emails, which makes me feel really old. And with the demonstration went the sort of the thought that this was going to reduce the working day in terms of the number of man hours. Obviously, that didn't materialise. So yeah, the department's changed, enormously.
Including the impact of Brexit, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Brexit has made things more bureaucratic. I think in terms of goods, there's an efficient online system there. So the issue for Jersey is that most goods that people order obviously will come through the border by far. Whereas if you're in the UK, if you're ordering something from Amazon, it may come from a warehouse in Manchester. So everything comes through the border. I mean, the volume is tremendous. Potentially up to 9,000 consignments a day that are coming in. And I think moving forward, things will continue to change. Particularly at the borders, particularly digital. I think we'll see some really sort of interesting developments around, for example, contactless corridors. Which sounds sort of science fiction, but it's happening already in places like the Middle East. And I think the UK.
For those who may not have heard of that, can you give a sort of rough?
Yeah, so it's basically using things like facial recognition and matching that to biometric data. So instead of maybe having to sort of have the traditional passport and queues that are often associated with immigration controls, people will walk through a corridor and will pass through that way. Obviously, if there are issues, officers will have to deal with it. So that's for the future. And sometimes when these things are introduced, it can be perceived as more bureaucracy. But I think it not only makes the borders safer, but it's actually better for the travelling public because they can make applications from home on their mobile phones, and and the speed by which people move through the controls should increase. So I think that's definitely the way forward.
That was the outgoing head of Jersey Customs and Immigration, Mark Cockerham. Thanks for your time. For more podcasts or to stay up to date with the latest news, please visit our website, bailiwickexpress.com, or visit our sister publication, the Jersey Evening Post. But for now, from the Bailiwick Express team, thanks for listening.